Let's talk about Labour trying to block Jeremy Corbyn from standing as a Labour MP. Keir Starmer has proposed a motion. It's going to be voted on today by the party's ruling body, the NEC, to not endorse his hard-left predecessor in the seat of Islington North in North London. The motion says Labour's chances of winning the next election would be significantly diminished if Mr Corbyn is allowed to stand for the party. Jeremy Corbyn has hit back and accused Sir Keir Starmer of denigrating the demographic foundations, I'm assuming he means democratic foundations, doesn't he, of Labour. After it emerged, he will be blocked. Let's talk about this with Stephen Pound, himself a former Labour MP in West London. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Is this the right decision by Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, I think it's absolutely inevitable, in all honesty. It's also, I have to say, a great birthday present for Neil Kinnock today. He's quite delighted. Look, whatever happens after the 2019 election, when Labour lost more votes than they had at any time, and they went down to 1935 levels, we had to draw a line between what was then a toxic, disastrous leadership and being potentially the government of this country. So by doing it this way, I think that we've actually drawn that line. However, as Jeremy Corbyn said, you know, I'm not going away. I think he probably might even fancy having a shot at being mayor of London. I mean, you know.
Oh, that would be fun. Well, we've certainly seen independent candidates do very well on that front. Ken Livingstone, of course, famously elected.
So, yeah.
But this is the thing. A lot of people. I mean, I'm all in favour of Sir Keir Starmer removing Jeremy Corbyn from his chance to be a Labour MP. Again, that's for the people of the Labour Party to decide. The NEC are likely to go ahead, but he wouldn't have put that motion forward if he didn't think he'd get it through. However, it's a bit strange that Sir Keir Starmer is saying currently this man's not fit to be a backbench Labour MP. And yet, for two general elections, 2017 and 2019, he was in the shadow cabinet, very senior figure in 2019, campaigning for him to be Prime Minister of this country. So how come he was fit in 2019, but he's not fit to even be a backbench MP now? OK,
well, two answers to that. Firstly, after the report on the anti-Semitism came out, Jeremy Corbyn was completely unrepentant. He said the whole thing had been whipped up and it was exaggerated for party political purposes. So that's a new issue, and it's one that actually did cross the line. The second thing is, Julia, you know, I was on the front bench. I mean, you used to give me a rough old time when I was a front bench spokesperson on Northern Ireland in Corbyn's cabinet. The thing is, you believe in collective responsibility. You know, you're playing with a football team. You don't always love the captain or the manager, but you have the loyalty to the team.
No, there's a very big difference to thinking, I'm not sure this person is the best person to lead our party or be a Prime Minister, and to think that someone is totally unfit for public office because of his hard left views and specifically also his anti-Semitic views. And I'm sorry, feel free to sue Jeremy Corbyn, feel free to sue any time. If you hang around with that many anti-Semites, I'm pretty sure, you know, the key thing is that report, and Jeremy Corbyn's reaction to that report, is used as an excuse by senior echelons of the Labour Party to say, well, it was your reaction to that anti-Semitism report. The report was basically into how the Labour Party was run and how it basically opened the doors to anti-Semitics during Jeremy Corbyn's period in office. That was led by Jeremy Corbyn. He did nothing to tackle that. And people like Keir Starmer stood quietly by. We understand from when they had their leadership debate afterwards, you know, Lisa and Andy made it clear there's no record of Keir Starmer raising this issue in Cabinet. It wasn't like he was speaking up behind closed doors and saying, I'm really unhappy about this, you need to tackle this issue. He stayed completely stum. And their hope was they get him into power and then they get rid of him, and then someone like Keir or others would take over. He was happy to elect a man totally unfit for public office to the job of being Prime Minister of this country. I mean, that is hypocrisy of the worst sort.
Well, look, hang on a second. There's a couple of things there. Firstly, I think it's quite appropriate to use a bit of Yiddish in there. I thought that was quite clever. But look, the reality is we don't know what went on behind the closed doors. We know that Keir Starmer, who's a fundamentally decent man, was horrified by what was happening. But the other thing is that Jeremy Corbyn actually got swept along with this. And the Momentum people, they were horrific people. They were the same people similar to what Militant did back in the 80s. The Labour Party seems to be neurasthenic about this. Every generation or so, we seem to have this sort of great explosion of people on the left, thinking that you can somehow turn the entire psyche of the nation round and end up with, some sort of Cuban system. Look, but the reality is that the problem with Jeremy Corbyn took place after the 2019 election, after the report, and after he refused to show any contrition. It was in his hands. But I think in some ways this typifies the issue with Jeremy Corbyn. He's quite a nice bloke. I've known him for 40 years, but he does get swept along, by the vain ardour of the crowd. And I think all that chanting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn,"
making excuses. You're making excuses. It's not good enough. It just isn't good enough. Can I ask you just finally, the former MP, we often find former MPs speak rather more freely than current
right
MPs. Let me ask you about Humza Yousaf, has been elected, the golden ratio, 52-48 in the second round of that SNP leadership ballot. He said that he plans to go ahead with a Scottish independence referendum, and he's also going to go ahead with a legal challenge on the issue of the controversial trans self-ID gender bill. In terms of him leading and going to be elected First Minister of Scotland, no doubt, in the Scottish Parliament today, has he made Labour's chances of winning the next general election with a majority in Westminster better or worse today?
Well, vastly, vastly better. Look, this is absolutely extra. How have the mighty fallen? The SNP was a steamroller that crushed virtually everything in its path, north of the border. And just as much as, Boris Johnson was the leader of a party with an 80-seat majority a couple of years ago, and now, he's a sort of a figure, sort of bellowing on the outskirts of that, and making a few £1 million speeches. Humza Yousaf, or Humza Useless, as everybody seems to call him up there, has had lumps ripped out of him by Kate Forbes during the hustings. Every single Tory and Labour leaflet in Scotland will have those quotes from Kate Forbes. He was useless health minister, useless justice minister, and so on. In many, many ways, the people are saying in Scotland, I'm going back to Labour, or in some cases, even the Liberal Democrats, or the Tories, who knows? But Humza Yousaf has actually made our life a lot easier north of the border. But
one of the things is, remember those very, very powerful election posters for the Conservatives, where they had Alex Salmond with a little mini Ed Miliband in his pocket, and how it would be SNP would be given power, and that was certainly also Nicola Sturgeon, again such a dominant figure. And this, if you vote Labour, you've got basically an SNP pulling the strings. Now, that's not going to work. People don't know who Humza Yousaf is. He's not a big name. He's not a household name like Nicola Sturgeon, and not so, not just a well-known name, but also, really rather well-admired, and also having had a very easy rise from the media, both in Westminster and in Scotland, in terms of her record in power on everything other than independence, although she hasn't really pushed that very, very far forward either. That argument's not going to be an argument that the Tories could use, really, against Labour this time round. That does help you.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. You put your finger on it. People sort of older than you, i.e. myself, will remember the David Steele, David Owen thing. This was back in the 80s. The Tories whacked out these posters with David Steele, who was then in the Liberals, and David Owen, who was in the SDP, and one was in the pocket of the other. It's a very, very powerful image. You can't get away with that this time for the simple reason, as you quite rightly say, very, very few people know who Humza Yousaf is. If they had this figure peering, out of Keir Starmer's breast pocket, then people would say, well, what's that you've got on your coat?
To be fair, though, I have to say, when it comes to most politicians, most people in the public don't know who virtually anyone is either, not even in the cabinet.
Well, that's a little harsh.
No, the polling it's extraordinary how few people recognise anybody. I hate to break it to you, Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. Always good to chat to you. Thank you very much.